Thank you for joining us again and welcome back to our channel. If you are joining for the first time, we salute you and we welcome you to Explorer. Here we talk geostrategic discussions at the heart of how Africa interacts with the global north and other strategic partners from around the world. Listen, folks, this will go down in history. It will be written by historians internationally and in the continent of Africa as the worst moment when the continent was brought down to its knees with regards to geostrategic partnership. It will be remembered as a time when the continent of Africa stood up to partners that considered it to be a problem to be solved, or was it a moment where the continent realized that it will not be business as usual from the strategic coordination? I'm saying this because it comes at a time when the continent of Africa at the moment is beginning to make unpopular choices because the geopolitical waters are muddy at the moment and nobody wants to swim in a muddy water. So why am I saying this? I'm saying this because the meeting at the White House will go down in history as the most strategic blunder that the United States of America showcased the continent of Africa. Make no mistake, if you consider the past couple of decades, we had the former president, Barack Obama, who engaged the continent of Africa. We've seen FOCAC, the Forum of China-African Cooperation. We've seen the Russians who have engaged the continent of Africa from the strategic point of view. We've also seen emerging Turkey to put the continent of African countries together to talk on issues. Italy, of all, have brought the African leaders to an extent together. We've seen other French powers across the European Union beginning to go cozy to the continent of Africa and to ensure that all leaders are on the table. But the United States of America's own administration, considering that we are at a challenging time and at a crossroad, like I've always said, the administration brought the transactional approach that they have used over and over to break the continent into further pieces. How come that you can select just a couple of leaders from the continent with over 50 nations? It's a classic divide and rule. So this is not going to go anywhere soon because the continent of Africa, if you were doubting where the United States of America stands on Africa's geostrategic partnership and collaboration, this meeting tells you all. And this is being laughed at Washington, it's been laughed at in Beijing, it's been laughed at in Moscow, it's been laughed at across the Middle East. And that is the moment that Africa showed its vulnerability at the global stage. Let's play this clip from CGTN that always do an amazing job from the global perspective based on their own analysis. And we will come back to give you more insight onto the reason why the continent of Africa has refused to go back to this unforgiving partnership. Let's play this clip.
The recent summit between US President Donald Trump and 5 African leaders as disrespectful and exploitative. The talks focused on trade and investment have been labeled by critics as an attempt by the US to secure African minerals. CGTN's Sharon Baranga reports.
The meeting between African leaders from Mauritania, Guinea-Bissau, Liberia, Senegal, Gabon, and the US president continues to elicit sharp criticism on the continent. The mini-summit aimed at boosting trade ties has provoked outrage across Africa for what many see as a dismissive and symbolic gesture.
It would have been preferable for Donald Trump to come to Africa to negotiate further, but it seems a little demeaning to bring heads of state who go to the Oval Office to strut around and take selfies when negotiating access to our mineral wealth. It's a little disappointing, really.
In Senegal, which was represented at the meeting, some argue that Africa's vast natural resources should not be treated as bargaining chips and must be managed cautiously.
Given
Senegal's geopolitics, it is mineral and strategic resources, and those of other countries that were at this meeting. Trump has financial capital to put on the table, and we also have mineral and energy resources to offer. But we cannot offer it like that to the first comer and blindly. We must do it in a win-win policy.
Others are questioning the intentions and structure of the meeting.
So this is where the problem is in terms of Africa's own geostrategic engagement with the United States at this critical time in the continent's own history. So you won't surprise why other countries across the world will continue to engage Africa from the respectable point of view. They view the continent as an opportunity to work alongside, whether it is in mineral resources or whatever, but it should be done from the collaborative point of view and from the win-win partnership to an extent. Others will question that China's involvement in the continent of Africa and the Russians' involvement in the continent of Africa, that they do have their own, of course, they should have their own interests. But again, they have not selected a few leaders in the continent to work with, because this particular meeting was a classic divide and rule that will be remembered in history as the reason why the United States of America's transformation in the past couple of months has demonstrated the behavior, not just within the countries across the region, not just in particularly selecting countries like South Africa, that has come under tremendous pressure. We look at the Ghana, and more importantly, Egypt, and a whole lot of countries. It comes at a time when you would think that the United States have learned from the Russia-Ukrainian war on the position that African countries took, that the United States will be to an extent to revive itself in regards to treating the continent of African nations with some due respect in terms of the geostrategic partnership. That's the reason why a lot of African experts around the world started questioning why the United States of America moved around to pick a few nations, to break them aside, and brought them to a point where the meeting was laughable. Let's play this clip from CGTN Africa.
Especially the absence of broader regional representation.
We have
to work with the African Union and ensure the large economies on the continent are represented, like Nigeria, Kenya, South Africa, Egypt and Algeria. All these countries, Morocco too, have to be on the table to make the discussions more interesting and more favorable for Africa.
At the African caucus in Bangui this week, financial experts echoed similar views. They say Africa must take charge of its future, starting with value addition and domestic processing of its vast mineral wealth.
Listen, folks, before we even listen to this expert that's going to talk about why Africa should take its own future, I've said it over and over. It's about time for the continent to wake up, because the U.S. might not be as strategic a partner, because the United States has the right to fight for its own interest, and African nations do not fight for their own interest. They have to put systems in place, structures in place that enables them to make unpopular choices, that enables them to make the differences in the global economy. The markets are saturated at the moment in the global north, and Africa must start waking up so fast to make some choices that do not sit well with the global north partners, in this case, the United States of America. Mr. Donald Trump is a transactional president, and he has sent the message over and over and clear. So African partners or African nations to start looking for markets that can provide them the alternative. This is the bottom line. And again, like I said, the African Continental Free Trade Area is the only lifeline that Africa has at this moment. So this meeting in Washington was laughable. It will be laughed at across capitals around the world. And if Africa never got the message, I think now is the moment for them to wake up and sit up and start saying about the value addition. Value addition should have been done many years ago. But at this critical time, it is better late than never at this moment, because it comes at a moment where Africa has come to realize that you are on your own. Let's play this clip from CGTN Africa.
The United States isn't necessarily the continent's most important exporting country, so perhaps this topic is less relevant to us, even if it has affected countries like Madagascar. But I think the takeaway is the theme of the caucus. We are talking about resilient infrastructure, human capital, and green wealth. By green wealth, we actually mean our natural resources.
As global powers continue to court Africa, voices across the continent are calling for more dignified, inclusive and strategic partnerships. Sharon Baranga, CGTN.
So it's not by chance that this is happening. As we were saying, countries like South Africa has 30% of tariffs at the moment. A number of African nations are facing incredible pressure with regards to their geostrategic coordination and partnership with the country of the United States of America. We've seen nations like South Sudan that has come under pressure with regards to migrants, and more importantly, we've looked at also Lesotho and the rest. And at the moment, Nigeria is trying to play defense. You know, Nigeria has been the darling with the United States of America, and they're going to go away from this because they're going to pay the price regards to their particular decision. So this transactional moment, it's a moment where African countries must wake up, must sit up, and start making some choices that do not sit well in the United States of America's own geopolitical circle. It is important for African countries to realize that the geopolitical environment has changed. No one has to inform them. No one has to indicate to them. It is clear at the moment that the United States is not as strategic a partner as it once was, that the continent, looking at the emerging middle class, a burgeoning population, youths coming out from university on a yearly basis in their millions, and you cannot wait for markets or enter into trade arrangement that has no particular guarantee. So maybe China is offering the options, maybe Russia to an extent, and the European Union to an extent are offering you what you have to take. Why do you stick into a partnership that is more transactional at this critical time in your history? Nobody should tell you that you have to wake up, because the United States of America has gone rogue in a number of areas in terms of trade, collaboration, major investment and development. If you look at Chinese Belt and Road Initiative, what it has done to the continent of Africa, it cannot be compared. It's like apple and oranges. So the reason why I'm talking about this particular meeting is that the meeting will go down in history at the moment where the continent of Africa was tested from the strategic position, and the continent waved to an extent. But again, if you do not have players like Nigeria, South Africa, and a whole lot of other players like Ghana and Morocco or Algeria on the table, when you're having such a global meeting, it is a cause for concern, and why African countries must pay attention with the new U.S. administration in terms of their strategic collaboration. The continent of Africa is facing one of the most challenging periods in its history. Whatever happened moving forward will define Africa's own future. If you thought that the President of the United States of America has a solution for your problems, you are mistaken. Mr. Donald Trump is a transactional leader, and you have to take him by his words and deal with him from that angle, because the United States of America's administration has never put the continent of Africa, a number of the administration have considered the continent to be countries where they can put in military bases, and you have seen how the US's policy is facing a rollback in the continent of Africa, looking at the unforgiving policies that we all have seen and the divide and rule that we all have experienced based on the recent meeting in the United States of America. The Chinese, the Russians, the European Union, the Asian partner, the Middle Eastern partners, emerging Turkey must be laughing at the continent of Africa at this critical time in the continent of Africa's history. I will be looking forward to meeting you soon in our next episode. Smash the like button and have a good day. Bye-bye.